You want to know who to start or sit at wide receiver? We got you covered. Let's go over the Week 9 slate game by game and tell you what tier every receiver should be in for fantasy. Just two teams on a bye this week. That's the Steelers and the 49ers. Now, there are some receivers that you can just set in your lineup and not worry about. These are the must starts at wide receiver: Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, Drake London, Jamar Chase, A.J. Brown, Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson, and DK Metcalf if he plays. Before you start setting your fantasy lineup, you're going to get your picks in on Underdog. For some reason you haven't tried Underdog yet, go ahead and do it. Download the app, go to underdogfantasy.com, and you get this free pick as a new customer. CJ Stroud just needs 1 yard. You get that pick, you win. Take the higher on 0.5 total yards for CJ Stroud. And if you are new to Underdog and you use code ENDGAME when you sign up, you also get up to $1,000 worth of bonus cash in your account. So try it now if you haven't yet. Now, Thursday night game, CJ Stroud is going to have fewer options. You already know Nico is on the shelf with that hamstring, and now Stephon Diggs. He's not playing this week, if at all the rest of the season. So that leaves Tank Dell. You think Tank Dell gets a boost, or is this going to be too much pressure for him?
I definitely think he'll get a boost, but also this is the Jets on the road. I can't feel great about Tank Dell or this passing attack this week. He'll get the targets. He's pretty much all CJ Stroud has to throw to. I think this week he's at least, a solid start, but that's as high as I can go.
Yeah, the targets, of course, will go up, but the matchup, you have to recognize this is not a great spot for him. It was a great spot last week, and sure, he scored, but it wasn't a big game. I worry now about CJ Stroud. Not as good on the road, tough defense. Don't assume that Tank is all of a sudden going to go to the moon just because he's the number one guy clearly in this offense. So I would still say solid just based on target volume, but that's as high as I'm going to go. Who's number one in the Jets offense? Technically, it looks like Garrett Wilson, although not by much. What do you think of Garrett Wilson in this matchup with the Texans?
You got to be feeling good about Garrett Wilson. He's stringing together good game after good game right now. Garrett Wilson, even though it's not the best matchup, I don't even care. He's a strong start this week.
I wish I had more confidence in the Jets offense. And I know Wilson has been good. I wonder if Davante Adams gets more involved. Maybe Davante Adams will never catch up to Wilson's target share. It wasn't a big difference in terms of targets. So I will say Garrett Wilson on the higher end of solid for me. But again, I just don't love the matchup, and I don't love the potential for points in this game in general. So for Davante Adams, does that mean you're putting him a notch lower, or does he still belong in the same tier as Wilson?
I'm putting him 2 notches lower. He's only a flex, and he's only a flex if you need points. 6.6 ADOT this year. This guy is Wan'Dale Robinson just wearing number 17 for the Jets. Flex.
I didn't see the Wan'Dale comparison coming, but I'm agreeing because he's a flex. I only have Wilson as a solid start. I'm putting Davante Adams lower until something changes. Davante Adams, sure, you can start him and hope he gets a touchdown, but that's kind of all we're looking for these days. The Saints going to take on the Panthers in Carolina this week. Good news for Chris Olave. He should have Derek Carr back. It didn't even matter last week. He had a big game even with the combo of Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener somehow. Does this put Olave close to must-start territory?
Let's see. Chris Olave, 13 targets, 100 yards, now gets the Panthers with his starting quarterback back. Borderline must-start this week. Very, very strong start.
Yeah, I don't see why you wouldn't start Olave. If he was able to do that with that quarterback duo, it's the Panthers. Come on. You got Olave. Roll him out there. I hope you took advantage of a buy low window if you didn't have him before this week. Now, if Johnson either sits like last week or gets shipped off, that leaves Xavier Legette as the number one target for the Panthers offense. Is that enough to interest you for fantasy?
Again, he's going to be in the flex tier. What's the upside here really with Bryce Young? It's a good matchup, but it's Bryce Young, flex tier.
He did score a touchdown last week for whatever that's worth, but then again, so did Jalen Coker, and we're not going to talk about him. So a flex, but really more of a desperation flex. Now, hopefully this video helps you with all your start sit decisions, but if you still have questions for start sit, waiver wire trades, or anything fantasy football related, use the Draft Lane app because that connects you directly with Chris and myself for all your fantasy football needs. Download it for free right now. This week, the Commanders going to take on the Giants. Thankfully for Terry McLaurin, he had his guy, Jaden Daniels, at quarterback last week. I mean, I feel like as long as JD's healthy, you got Terry McLaurin, you're rolling him out.
Exactly. One of these guys, he's just going to live in the strong start tier for me pretty much every week as long as Jaden Daniels is playing.
And to clarify, I'm glad you said strong start. Can't say absolutely must because he doesn't quite belong with those first, dozen or so players we talked about, but he's pretty close. Now, Malik Neighbors, not living in that must-start tier these days because I guess the Daniel Jones effect has taken its toll. Neighbors underwhelmed for a second straight week. What do you do with him?
I still think you have to start him. I know the Commanders, we've talked about it. This Commanders secondary is playing great. They just really did a good job against DJ Moore and those Bears wide receivers. I still have to put him in the strong start tier this week, but I'm certainly getting nervous.
Getting nervous on both sides, I will say, number one, like you said, this Commanders defense has not just been better, they've been significantly better against the pass, specifically haven't given up a 100-yard game to a receiver since week 6. Neighbors is one of the guys who could do it. It could happen on one play. So you can't count him out. I'll say solid this week, but yeah, I would be nervous putting him in my lineup. And then with Wan'Dale Robinson, well, I guess at least we kind of know what we're getting every week, don't we?
You can do better than Wan'Dale Robinson. Shoot for some upside here. I'm avoiding Wan'Dale Robinson.
Yes, targets matter, but so does depth of target. So does the catchable rate on those targets. Yeah, in this matchup, like you said, if you're nervous about Neighbors, which I am, I'm not starting Wan'Dale. Now, we do have to talk about Darius Slayton, wound up being the leading receiver for the Giants this past week. Over 100 yards. This isn't the first time does he actually have the most upside of this wide receiver core.
I can't say he has more upside than Neighbors, but he has way more upside than Wan'Dale Robinson. Like, if I'm choosing between Wan'Dale Robinson and Darius Slayton, I'm definitely going with Darius Slayton. But he's also very risky, so I'll say risky flex.
Spot on. That's where he belongs. He's never going to be much more than a flex. Again, Commanders have been doing a much better job. Sure, he could shake loose and make a big play, but you don't want to risk it unless you need to. Dolphins going to Buffalo to take on the Bills. All right, look, Tyreek Hill, you still want him. You still need him in your lineup because of that upside. But what about Jalen Waddle? Did not smash in his first game back with Tua.
No, and I'm getting a little nervous here, and this is not a great matchup on the road in Buffalo, but he's always got upside. He's always got the potential. I'm going to put him in the solid start tier this week.
I'm going to put him right there as well. Again, has that upside, but also doesn't have the highest floor. Sure, it'll get you something. But man, I mean, Buffalo does own the Dolphins. On the road in Buffalo, not a great spot. So I really think this is going to be more of a run-heavy offense this week for Miami, as it should be. So Waddle, you could start him, but I think he's more like a wide receiver 3 for me this week. Now, on the Bills side of things, Amari Cooper is there, but you couldn't tell much from the box score last week. You feeling like Cooper gets more involved in this game?
He might, but I really don't like his role in this offense right now. Maybe it'll change as time goes on, but very risky this week. I think Cooper is like just a boom-bust flex option right now in this offense.
I think it might take some time for the chemistry to develop. I get a little carried away by the fact he happened to score a touchdown in his debut. Looked more like what we expected this past week. He's startable, but I think right now I'm going to put him just as a flex option. On the other hand, Keon Coleman seems to be taking off just as they get a new receiver in town. But how high can he be on Coleman?
I think you got to be pretty high. This is 2 good games in a row. It looks like maybe he's starting to get used to the NFL game here. I don't want to go too crazy, but I'm going to say like the lower end of the solid starts.
The matchup isn't too rough for him. Keon Coleman is getting those downfield shots. Look, I feel like this is still going to be one of those players who's going to give you those ups and those downs, and the downs will come, but it may not be this week. So if you need him, you can start him. And Khalil Shakir, also taken off with Amari Cooper now in town. Look, Shakir, I know doesn't get you big plays, but man, he's leading this team in targets again and again.
He's one of those guys that's just solid every week for you. You know, you put Khalil Shakir in, you're mostly going to get points and be okay. Not the most upside, but I think he's a solid flex option.
I feel that's fair. Flex because get you that floor in PPR leagues. Not a super high ceiling, but man, being Josh Allen's favorite target right now, for the moment at least, it's got to count for something. The Chargers at Browns. Finally had the Ladd McConkey breakout week. How does he follow it up?
Yeah, this actually is a good matchup for Ladd because he's been great against man coverage this year. Browns run a ton of man, but at the same time, I don't want to get too carried away by what happened last week. Like, let's remember the weeks before where he was just, good in fantasy, but I think after last week, I have to at least put him in the solid tier this week.
Can't get carried away, but I kind of saw this coming. He's become what we thought he would be. He's the number one target in this wide receiver room. And it's not like they have a whole lot else there. No offense. Guys like Josh Palmer are, a deep threat only kind of player. McConkey's going to get more and more involved. And what I like is that this Chargers offense is starting to pass the ball more, not just try to control it on the ground. But that said, it's not a smash spot. I think he's solid. And now all of a sudden the Cleveland wide receiver room is interesting. All right, Amari Cooper is gone. That leaves probably Jerry Jeudy as the de facto wide receiver one, although he wasn't last week, but he was still good.
Right, I feel like Jerry Jeudy's always going to be okay, but this isn't a great matchup this week against the Chargers, but it is Jameis Winston. Again, I'm going to put him in the flex tier. He's one of these guys, he's kind of like Khalil Shakir to me. Like, he'll get you points, but not the most upside.
I think that's fair. That's exactly right. I mean, that the ceiling isn't super high because there's another receiver we're about to talk about that seems to be that big play threat. I think Jeudy is always a decent flex with Winston at quarterback. Now, what about Cedric Tillman? Talked about him 2 straight weeks as a waiver wire pickup. I know everyone's going to go crazy for him now, but does that mean you have to start him?
I think he's definitely startable, and I do regret not putting him on the Booms video, which I was going to do, and then I pivoted to Jerry Jeudy instead. But I do have to have a little bit of caution this week against this Chargers secondary. He is more the vertical receiver, so he's going to be, pretty dependent on those big plays. But I still think he's got the upside, so I'm going to say this week in a tough matchup, flex with upside.
Can't get carried away because the matchup is very different here, or that Ravens secondary is one of the worst against receivers. That's who he feasted on last week. And they were kind of in come from behind mode when he got that second touchdown. But he still is a flex with that upside because he's starting to emerge. But believe it or not, it was actually Elijah Moore who got more receptions than both Tillman and Jeudy. Do we have to pay attention to Elijah Moore now because of the quarterback change?
I guess we do. He led the team in targets as well, so... Again, not a ton of upside here for Elijah Moore, but he's a solid flex.
I mean, if there's any player at any position who has fooled us before in games like this, it's Elijah Moore. Like, I used to be in on Elijah Moore until I learned better. I really don't want to go there, but I guess he is, for me, a possible flex. Patriots at the Titans. If it's Jacoby Brissett at quarterback, I think the first question is, do we need to consider any Patriots receiver this week? I guess let's start with Demario Douglas. He might be the only one.
No, I'm done with the pop experience. 2 weeks ago, gets an illness, and this week loses his quarterback. Like, no, I'm done. On the road against the Titans, not touching any Patriots wide receivers.
Had his chance, didn't happen. It's definitely not going to happen this week. No to Douglas, no to any Pats receiver. And we want to say no to Calvin Ridley. We can't ignore 15 targets and a 100-yard game. So... at home, gets the Pats. Where do you stand on Ridley this week?
We can't ignore 15 targets and 100 yards, you're right. But we also can't ignore the 17 targets and 4 catches for 40 yards the 2 weeks combined prior either. And probably going to get shadowed by Christian Gonzalez. I am not falling for this trap this week. I am avoiding Calvin Ridley.
Well, I think he is still a flex option because just pure target share. But yeah, I'm not expecting a big game here, so don't fall for it. Sure, you can scoop him up, you can stash him. He'll have some big weeks. I just don't think this is going to be it. Cowboys taking on the Falcons. All right, CeeDee Lamb proving again why you don't ever sit him. Drake London didn't have a great game, but yeah, we're going to say you got him. You should start him. Cowboys defense definitely not scaring anybody these days. Let's go now to Jalen Tolbert. Didn't really do much. I mean, really no Cowboy outside of CeeDee Lamb did much. Do you think he can bounce back, though?
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't like how much like Keontae Turpin got involved. It wasn't really Jalen Tolbert as the number two. I don't know. He might see a decent amount of AJ Terrell because I don't think Terrell's going to follow CeeDee Lamb in the slot. So Tolbert this week, I think, is a very risky flex.
Honestly, I think if there's a path to fantasy relevance for Tolbert, it's garbage time. It's kind of what we saw from the Cowboys last week, and it was all CeeDee Lamb. Maybe Tolbert because they're down big to the Falcons. I mean, at this point, that's kind of what we just have to expect from the Cowboys. So a risky flex. You shouldn't need to go there this week, though. On the other hand, Darnell Mooney for Atlanta, another big game. Sure, it was against Tampa, but again, this Cowboys defense doesn't look too intimidating.
No, it doesn't. But Darnell Mooney, I mean, let's not forget, you take out those 2 Tampa Bay games, he's just kind of been okay this year, but he's got upside, he's got potential. I'll say the higher end of the flex tier.
I think he's a little more than a flex just because this offense has been good. It's a home game, against the Cowboys. I think he's solid, maybe a little bit on the lower end of the solid tier, though. Raiders at the Bengals. The only Raider worth discussing at wide receiver is Jacoby Myers, although Jacoby Myers definitely under consideration here how many targets he's getting. What do you think he does against Cincinnati?
You got to feel pretty good. Bengals secondary doesn't scare me. I mean, the quarterbacks for the Raiders definitely scare me, but Jacoby Myers in the games without Devontae Adams has been good. He gets the targets. He could score a touchdown. I can't say he's like a must start or anything, but I think, again, he's going to be one of my higher end of the flex tier.
Well, I'll say most weeks, despite the record, the Raiders are not getting embarrassed or anything like that, but on the road against the Bengals, there's potential. They're going to have to pass a lot more than they want. Jacoby Myers is going to be the beneficiary. He's been getting more targets than Brock Bowers, so I think he's definitely a solid start. And then good old T. Higgins. We know the deal here. If he's on the injury report in any way, shape, or form, I'm out. Let's say he plays and he's good before Sunday. Are you in on Higgins?
Got to be in on T. Higgins. I mean, he was great before that injury. They're already saying like optimistic and day to day, so I'm hopeful he'll be off the injury report. If he is, against the Raiders at home, strong start.
I need that 100% assurance that he is definitely playing with no limitations. If I get that, yeah, okay, strong start. Next up, the Broncos taking on the Ravens on the road here. Courtland Sutton did have that big bounce back week. Now, of course, that was against the Carolina Panthers, but this matchup is technically even better on paper. Are you in on Sutton?
You got to be in on Sutton this week against the Ravens, who are giving up the most fantasy points to wide receivers. How can you not? I mean, Cedric Tillman just went nuts against them, and he plays a similar role that Cedric Tillman does in this Denver offense. So, yeah, Courtland Sutton this week. I'm not going to say strong start because it's Courtland Sutton and the Broncos, but very solid start.
You don't want to get carried away, but still, this is a better matchup because Baltimore is worse against wide receivers than Carolina, and also they're going to need to pass. They didn't really need to pass the ball that much last week to beat Carolina. They're probably going to need to pass quite a bit against Baltimore, and they won't be able to run it, so you got to like Sutton. I'll go strong start, bottom end of that tier, but still, I think he's strong, and I'll definitely take the higher on 51.5 receiving yards on underdog. Absolutely. I mean, he smashed that last week, and like I said, it should be even better this week. And if you haven't tried underdog yet, you get that free pick, already mentioned, just 1 yard from CJ Stroud on Thursday night. You combine those picks, great chance to win your very first time. And if you haven't tried underdog and you're signing up, make sure you use promo code NGAME to take advantage of the free picks plus your deposit match to get up to $1,000 of bonus cash. Speaking of strong starts, Zay Flowers proven again that he pretty much should just live in that tier. But do you feel that way this week? Because he might get Pat Surtain.
Yeah, the Broncos, Pat Surtain. Oh, man. I know you want to roll out Zay Flowers. He's been mostly good, but I do have my worries this week. I'm going to downgrade him to the solid start tier this week.
You have to. You cannot ignore stud receiver after stud receiver. Garrett Wilson, Mike Evans, on and on, that have been completely shut down by Surtain. He's still startable, but just know to lower your expectations a lot. So now the question is, Rashad Bateman, is he even startable at all?
You're just hoping for one big touchdown or something like that here. I'm not doing it this week. I'm going to avoid.
Got to do it here. I mean, Broncos is not just Surtain, not just one receiver is going to get limited. They're just a good pass defense, top 5 against wide receivers for fantasy purposes. No, you got to avoid Bateman. Let's talk Bears at the Cardinals. Pretty frustrating receiver room here, led by DJ Moore. Now, Moore did leave briefly with a back issue late in the game, but he did come back, so he should be good to go. But is he going to be good for fantasy this week?
Who knows? One of the most frustrating wide receiver rooms. You just never know what you're going to get week to week. You never know what Caleb Williams is going to show up week to week. The Cardinals actually did do a decent job against Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle last week. Low end of the solid starts, I guess.
It's like you never can go too low on DJ Moore, but at the same time, like you said, sometimes Caleb Williams looks like the number one pick, and then sometimes he looks like a rookie who's still learning. So solid because the matchup shouldn't be too bad for him, but man, a lot of risk here. So that said, what about the rookie Romo Dunze? Going to go higher or lower on him?
I know he had more targets and a higher first read percentage last week, but I still don't think I can put him ahead of DJ Moore. I'll put him as just a flex option.
Agree. Risky flex. He does have that upside. He does get some deep shots, but again, you're just hoping and looking for some potential. Risky flex. Keenan Allen, where does that leave him?
He's a flex for sure. Not a lot of upside here. Like one of these guys, you need points, he'll get it for you, probably.
Maybe he'll get you some points. Again, it's just so annoying to not know exactly what's going to happen in this wide receiver room. Again, a flex with more of a, I don't know if I can even say floor. What is his floor? Touchdown potential, but that's about it. And did you start Marvin Harrison Jr. last week? You might not have, because he was bad for several weeks in a row, and then he finally had another huge game. So now where do we stand on Harrison? It's a home game against the Bears.
Yeah, tough matchup here against Jalen Johnson. But what I really liked from Marvin Harrison last week was they used him more on those horizontal breaking routes, which is great for fantasy, great for his value, not just a ton of vertical stuff. I don't expect him to be as good as he was last week because it's the Bears, not the Dolphins. But I think Marvin Harrison this week is a solid start.
I think he at least moves up a tier last week. I think he was a risky flex. The risk paid off because they finally started using him in a smarter way. You got to think that continues. Don't want to get carried away here either because, again, it's not a great spot, but at the least, he can say he's solid this week. Now let's talk Jaguars and Eagles. Tough break for Christian Kirk and the Jags. He is out for the season with that fractured collarbone. So let's look at Brian Thomas Jr., who also left the game with a chest injury. This is going to be touch and go here. Not sure what his status is for week 9. So if he plays, do you risk it?
I think if he plays, you kind of have to risk it. It's the Eagles. They're probably going to have to throw a lot. He's been mostly good. I'm going to say if Brian Thomas plays, he's on the higher end of the solid starts for me.
This is going to be something definitely to monitor throughout the week as far as injury reports go. Heard all sorts of things already, but yeah. Brian Thomas was already clearly number one target in this offense, and if Kirk is out, it can't hurt him. If he plays, they're going to have to throw the ball a lot here. I might even say he's a strong start if he's healthy. And Gabe Davis also had a shoulder injury, although it sounds like he'll probably be good to go for this Week 9 matchup, but does it even matter?
No, even without Christian Kirk, is he really going to get a bump? Probably not. I'm avoiding Gabe Davis.
Can continue to avoid Gabe Davis as usual. You probably don't want to avoid Devontae Smith, not just coming off a big game, but now at home against the Jaguars. I mean, how high can you be on Smith this week?
Got to be very high on Devonta Smith this week. This is a smash spot at home. The Eagles offense looked great last week. Devonta Smith looked great. Strong start.
Very strong start. Yeah, he'll have his ups and downs. This should definitely be on the upside. You almost have to start Devontae Smith. Rams at the Seahawks. Things have changed here. Now the Rams got 2 receivers you have to start in Kupp and Nakua now that they're back. Look, if DK does return, I think you still have to start him as well. What do you do with Tyler Lockett?
Yeah, did not get the no DK Metcalf bump last week like I thought. I mean, barely got targeted. Tyler Lockett is just one of these guys. Like, if you're desperate, you can flex them, but I'd prefer not to.
You know, early in the season, we were wanting to stream against the Rams secondary because they're giving up a lot of points to receivers. But this Seattle offense, this pass offense specifically, starting to take some steps backward. And it wasn't just because DK was out last week. So I'm going to say Lockett is just a flex, which you shouldn't need this week with only 2 teams on bye. And I feel with Jackson, Smith, and Jigba, we're going to say pretty much what we predicted was going to happen last week. It's disappointment.
Yeah, I mean, he was okay, but is that what you're looking for? Okay, and now DK Metcalf will probably be back. I'm going to avoid JSN as well.
Yeah, don't know what's going on there. This really should have been a breakout season for him, and instead he's going backwards. And it's not about the usage. You can't blame the offensive coordinator. He's just not been that great. So I'm just going to bench him until further notice. Lions at the Packers. Sun God, good to go. Khalif Raymond, that's right. Khalif Raymond now, a couple of weeks in a row with a touchdown. Jameson Williams will be out again. Is Khalif Raymond now on the streaming radar?
He would be, except it's the Packers on the road. Now, Jair Alexander got banged up in that game again. It seems to get banged up every other week. They're optimistic he'll play, so I guess watch this. But I guess with Jameson Williams out, he's got touchdown upside, but really risky flex here.
I think he's always, at best, a risky flex. This is the classic example of a guy who, like in a tournament, in a pick'em or something like that, where you don't have to rely on him to help your fantasy team. Maybe roll the dice, but again, just it's kind of touchdown or bust, isn't it? As if the Packers receivers weren't frustrating enough for fantasy, now we could be looking at Malik Willis back at quarterback. What does that mean for Jaden Reed, first of all?
It's the Lions. Like, you want to start Jaden Reed, but hey, it was the Jags last week, and I think he had the Colts like 2 weeks ago, and he's doing nothing. Oh, man, so frustrating. So frustrating. And it might be Malik Willis. I guess just because of the matchup, a solid start, but I hate myself for even saying that.
I know, it's like you don't really want to bench him, but then you're annoyed when you start him and he doesn't do much. But again, even with Willis, we saw a few weeks ago, could hit that big play, could score a touchdown. They'll probably use him in the backfield on some end rounds and things like that. So yeah, I agree. I can't move him below the solid tier, and that's where he's going to be, mainly because of the matchup. Now, I do think I can move Romeo Doubs a little bit lower. He's still getting targeted. Again, he could always score a touchdown, but I can't put him as more than a flex this week.
Right, assuming it's Malik Willis, which we're going to assume that right now, you got to be worried because he's not a guy who's going to get those end arounds, who's going to, rack up the yards after the catch. So only because the matchup is so good, I'll say flex.
And then there's Christian Watson, who we never really know what to do. Lions defense, Willis at quarterback. Can you consider it?
Nah, this is getting too risky for me. I'm going to avoid.
Going to avoid Watson as well, and probably not even really going to talk Dontavian Wicks because he's just a straight up avoid at this point. On Sunday night, the Colts are going to take on the Vikings. Let's talk about these Colts receivers because as of right now, we can assume it's still Anthony Richardson in the saddle, although they have left the door open that it could be Flacco, which is, of course, what we all are hoping for fantasy. All right, what does this mean for Michael Pittman? Is there any trust left here?
Well, if it's Anthony Richardson, there is no trust. I think you got to bench Michael Pittman. But if it is Joe Flacco, there's definitely trust here. I mean, I don't think it's going to be the biggest game for Michael Pittman, but the Vikings not very good against the pass or wide receivers. So I think if it's Flacco, I will put Pittman into the solid start this week.
I really hope it is. Obviously, look, the Vikings give up a lot of points to wide receivers. This should be a great spot, but I can't go very high on Michael Pittman if it's Anthony Richardson. We saw how bad he was. So if it's AR, I'm saying he's a flex only for touchdown potential. If it's Flacco, I'm moving him up to the solid tier. Now, Josh Downs did manage to have a big game with Richardson. So does that mean by default he has to be ranked higher?
I mean, probably, but look, the touchdown was a complete breakdown by the secondary where he was wide open, and the other one was just like a chuck and pray throw from Richardson. Even with Richardson, I'm not going to feel great about Downs. He'll only be a flex. But again, if it is Flacco in this matchup, solid start.
Maybe being too optimistic here. Downs has looked great. He did manage at least to do something here. I mean, I don't know. Can Richardson really be that bad again? I'll say Downs. I'm going to put him solid right now in that tier. And if it's Flacco, I'll bump him up maybe to even a strong start. On the other side, we got Jordan Addison. Been kind of a disappointment here. Do you think he bounces back in what should be a good matchup for him?
Yeah, he's just had what should be two good matchups, and he's done almost nothing. I'm pretty much done with Jordan Addison. He's an avoid for me.
Man, I'm not going to completely ignore Addison, although I will just say right now, he's a flex, boom bust at this point. Big play touchdown. He's always got that potential, and I do like the matchup. But, how involved is he going to be is the question. And on Monday night, we're going to get the Bucs at the Chiefs. I guess the last man standing there, maybe the only guy you should even think about in that wide receiver room, is the rookie Jalen McMillan. All right, so is Jalen McMillan worth your time in Kansas City this week?
Against this Chiefs secondary, he did not get that Chris Godwin role that for some reason a lot of people thought he was going to get. He just had his same role basically. He did get the targets, I will say that, but this is a Chiefs secondary. Touchdown or bust, I'm going to avoid Jalen McMillan.
Snap share was great. Targets, fine. Matchup is horrible. I can't do it yet. Stash him still, but sit him this week. I think one of the trickier decisions this week will be, is it time to roll out DeAndre Hopkins? He's been there for a week in KC, and now it's the Bucs secondary. Are you tempted?
I'm tempted, but at the same time, I know the risk here. Like, he didn't play a whole lot last week, and he'll probably play more, but I don't think he's going to play, 80% of the snaps. So it's a good matchup. He's at home. He's got Mahomes. He's a flex.
Flex feels about right. Look, what have we seen from all these big name receivers who got traded? Amari Cooper, Devontae Adams, week 2 with their new teams? Nothing. At least not very much. So let's not go overboard here with Hopkins. You can flex him if you need to, but that's it. And then Xavier Worthy, well, he did score, but is that enough?
Nah, very, very risky here, even in a good matchup. He could score, but that's it. Yeah, I'm just going to avoid Xavier Worthy.
I'm avoiding Worthy. Just don't see it happening again. Total roll of the dice here. Give me Khalif Raymond before I put Xavier Worthy in my lineup this week. You also want to catch our start sit advice at running back, quarterback, tight end, and everything else we got to help you win. It's in the Week 9 playlist right here.